I found tampons in my husband's car. I wished he had been unfaithful to me instead, so that my kids wouldn't have had to go through this. I am a 29-year-old female who has been with my 30-year-old husband for 7 years, married for 4. I've never had reason to suspect he was unfaithful to me or even remotely dissatisfied with our marriage. He likes to joke that we're still living the honeymoon phase. Nearly 5 years and 2 kids in. I wouldn't have questioned that or him were it not for a surprise I found in his car last month when buckling our daughter into her car seat. I noticed something slotted between the cushions. At first, I thought it was just some stray toy or snack wrapper, so I reached down to fish it out. As my fingers closed around the object, I felt the familiar cylindrical shape of a tampon. Confusion washed over me as I pulled it into view, the bright wrapper stark against the upholstery. This wouldn't have been so unusual had I not had an IUD that had stopped my period for the past year, and I didn't even recognize the wrapper style. It was a brand I never used. A small but glaring discrepancy that made my stomach churn. I brought it to my husband's attention later that evening, still holding the offending item like it was evidence in a mystery I was desperate to solve. He didn't seem to understand what it was at first, staring at the tampon in my hand with genuine confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his brow furrowing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I found it in your car between the cushions. And it's not mine. I haven't had a period in over a year. Remember?" His face remained blank for a moment longer before realization dawned. He shrugged and said it probably belonged to his coworker Fiona. His initial confusion quickly gave way to dismissiveness as he waved off my concerns with a nonchalant explanation. "Probably Fiona's," he said with a shrug. Turning back to his phone. "She must have dropped it when we went out for lunch the other day." I stared at him, waiting for a sign that he understood why this was bothering me. But there was nothing. No apology, no concern. Just a casual dismissal. It was as if the tampon was no big deal. And I was overreacting. His indifference felt like a slap in the face, leaving me reeling and questioning everything I thought I knew about our marriage. It's not uncommon for my husband to carpool to lunch with his coworkers, and we're both fairly close to Fiona and her husband. The thought of my husband carpooling with Fiona and her husband had always been a non-issue. They were friends, after all, and it wasn't uncommon for them to share rides to lunch. In fact, we often socialized as couples spending weekends at each other's houses for barbecues or movie nights. Fiona and I had even bonded over shared experiences like the challenges of balancing work and family life. Our kids played together while we chatted about everything from the latest office gossip to more personal topics. It made sense, considering how often they carpooled. I reassured myself that the tampon could have easily slipped out of Fiona's purse during one of these outings. No big deal. Maybe it fell out when she was grabbing her phone or wallet, getting jostled around in the process. No big deal, right? It was just one of those little accidents that could happen to anyone. I brushed it off as a harmless mistake, convincing myself there was no need to worry. After all, our friendship with Fiona and her husband was solid, built on years of trust and shared experiences. There was no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary, so I pushed the unsettling discovery to the back of my mind, determined not to let a small, easily explained incident cause unnecessary drama. I put it out of my mind until we had dinner with Fiona and her husband a couple of weeks later. I had sincerely wanted to believe my husband. I just couldn't get over the way it had been tucked in the seat, and how my husband had seemed not to have any regard for it whatsoever. Maybe playing dumb? I don't know. I did something that I now feel kind of crazy for doing. I faked an emergency and asked Fiona if she had any tampons while we were out together. She handed me one almost identical to the tampon I'd found in our back seat, and I breathed a sigh of relief. So the tampon there was probably the same tampon here. And in all likelihood, there was an innocent explanation as to why it had been left in the back seat in the first place. I thought I'd seen the last of the out-of-place feminine hygiene products until I found another tampon this morning. This time in my sock drawer. I feel physically ill at the thought of my husband having an affair, and even more nauseated at the thought that the woman might have left these tampons out for me to find if it was my husband's coworker. Why would you give herself away by offering me one the other night? In any other situation, I would want to talk to my husband about this, but I feel too sick and embarrassed to approach him with what I found. Contemplating every possible source of 2 tampons has been my personal hell for the past few weeks. But I wanted to share an update. Shortly after posting here, I told my sister what happened. The tampon in the back seat in the sock drawer. My husband's cluelessness, the tampon from Fiona, and all the things I suspected but didn't want to believe. We compared tampons, say, for the back seat, one I had already discarded, and they were a match, just in different absorbency. I hadn't left either in a place where my husband or daughters would have found them and moved them around. My daughters didn't know what they were or where they had come from. My sister was convinced it was Fiona either puking, my husband fucking with me, or both. Direct confrontation of either party still seemed like a bad idea. So she suggested inviting Fiona and her husband over for our Labor Day barbecue. Unfortunately, they already had plans. My sister and I agreed that it was too soon for cameras without any other evidence, so it was just a waiting game from there, watching my husband for any changed behavior. There was none. Our house for any misplaced foreign items. There were none. And even the girls, for any new friends they might have met. My sister's husband was adamant on this last point, and partly why he was inclined to believe that the tampons were harmless. If anything had been happening in or around our home, he said, it would be nearly impossible to keep it from me and the girls, since my husband was the one taking them to and from daycare and most other activities during the week. I felt a good bit of consolation in that it wasn't until my younger daughter, 2yo, came down with something last week that I felt any differently. I wanted to be the one home taking care of her. But my husband insisted that I stay at work while he stayed home with her. I was okay with that. My sister and her husband figured it was a good sign that he would take the time off at a moment's notice, and at that point, we were all already beginning to put the tampon fiasco behind us. By the third or fourth day, I was just happy to see a near-healthy child and a husband who was helping see her through it. Toward the end of that week, though, I came home to something strange. The toddler that I'd left that morning in an old PJ set was now dressed in a onesie I'd never seen before, with a tiny clip in her hair. I can't say I have the sharpest memory, but I have a pretty good sense of what my kids wear on a day-to-day basis, and particularly what kinds of clothes they wear. I'd sworn off the full-length sleep suits with snaps across the front long before we'd ever had our second. The long snaps are just a pain in the ass and a no-go for efficient diaper changes, IMO. It's just not something I would dress her in, and my husband knows as much. He doesn't plan for or buy the girls' clothes, and he certainly doesn't accessorize them. So I was bewildered and kind of floored at the thought of someone around our sick child without my knowledge. I didn't think twice, and I went straight to my husband to ask if anyone had been over to see him or the girls. He seemed confused like before and asked me why I would think that it had just been him and the kids all day. I asked him again if someone had so much as stopped by to say hello, and he denied it. He told me to calm down. I might have lashed out and come forward with the accusations right then and there, but our older daughter was in the room and she sensed something was up. In a calmer voice, I asked him a third time if anyone had been around our children, and my husband swore that the girls hadn't been around anyone but him. He also denied buying new clothes or doing anyone's hair. With our daughter in the room. And my emotions all over the place. I decided to leave it. I couldn't make sense of it then, and it hardly seems clearer now. After I've driven myself half crazy with explanations that aren't adding up after nearly losing my mind over a hair clip and a onesie, I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with the accusations and half-baked guesswork. I'd gotten so absorbed in the paranoia and misery of my situation that I wasn't sleeping, eating, or caring for my kids the way I should have been. And I wasn't getting any answers. So I decided to pull the trigger on the hidden cameras and have them shipped to my sister's house, with my brother-in-law agreeing to help with the install setup over at mine. Before the cameras were ever delivered, though, I got my long-awaited confirmation last week. The day began like any other weekday morning in our bustling household. My husband and I rushed around trying to corral our two energetic daughters into their school uniforms. All while attempting to grab a quick bite to eat ourselves. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, as if we were all in this hectic dance together. Once the girls were dropped off at school, my husband and I went about our respective workdays, counting down the hours until we could reunite with our little ones. But there was a strange feeling that I couldn't shake off, no matter how hard I tried, and it only intensified when I received a notification on my phone while at work. A Ring notification machine at the front door. I clicked on the video clip, half expecting to see the usual delivery person or neighbor passing by, but what I saw left me stunned. There on my doorstep was a young woman leading my daughter into the house, hand in hand, with my husband and other daughter close behind them. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The girls were supposed to be in daycare and my husband was at work. The woman, as far as I knew, was living 2 states away with a court order keeping her there. Yet here she was, in our home with my husband and children. A wave of panic washed over me as I scrambled to make sense of the situation. Was this some kind of mistake, a misunderstanding, or was there something more sinister at play? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that the answers to my questions might be far more troubling than I ever could have imagined. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The blood pounding in my ears as I watched the unthinkable unfold before my eyes. There, on the footage captured by our Ring doorbell, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. A woman I hadn't seen in years leading my youngest daughter into our home, hand in hand with my husband and older daughter trailing behind them. The shock of the moment rendered me momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? The girls were supposed to be at daycare and my husband at work. Yet here they were, entering our house with a woman I never thought I'd see again. My sister-in-law. My initial reaction was one of sheer disbelief. A desperate hope that there must be some kind of mistake, some innocent explanation for what I was witnessing. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of anger surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to consume everything in its path. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest as I dialed my husband's number. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But as the phone rang on the other end, there was no response. I immediately called my husband to ask him what the fuck this woman was doing in our house. He didn't answer, so I texted it to him. Even in his stupidity, he probably realized he had messed up by going through the front door. Knew I had gotten the Ring notification and wanted to delay the inevitable. By the 5th or 6th subsequent call, though, he did pick up. The woman on the camera was my husband's sister. As I would come to find out later, she was the likely source of both tampons, the onesie, and the bow. She is also registered as an individual with a history of abuse, and a recovering addict who spent the better part of her adolescence and young adulthood coercing the silence of another one of my husband's family members after she had abused them. I hadn't seen or heard from her in years, and from the way my husband talked about her, I didn't expect I ever would. But here she was, in our house with our children. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her after years of silence that left me reeling. It was the realization of what her presence in our home meant. My sister-in-law, fresh off another stint in rehab, was the last person I expected to find sneaking into our lives, especially under such clandestine circumstances. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a random tampon or a harmless mistake. It was about deception and betrayal at the deepest level. Suffice to say, I was livid. It wasn't an affair at all, and still somehow infinitely more disgusting. Knowing who it was and why all of this had been happening. Apparently, my sister-in-law had wanted to reconnect and make amends with people she'd hurt, and my husband was high on that list. The irony of her attempts at reconciliation through deceit and intrusion was not lost on me. My husband didn't want me to know, or worse, try to keep her family, our children, away from her. So they'd been meeting in secret often at our house when I was at work. They would enter through the garage in my husband's car, so the Ring camera at the front door wouldn't tip me off. The level of planning and secrecy involved made my skin crawl. She spent the night on a weekend. I had been on a business trip and slept in our bed. The very thought of her in our home, in our bed, made me feel violated. She babysat our girls on a night. My husband told me he had dropped them off at his parents', the casual way he had lied to me. The ease with which he had kept this secret made me question everything I thought I knew about him. She bought the girls clothes and dressed my youngest in the onesie and bow that my husband had promised in his life. I had dressed her in myself. The image of my daughter in that unfamiliar outfit, a tiny clip in her hair, now felt like a haunting reminder of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. And yet, when I turned to my husband for reassurance, for a glimmer of hope in the face of uncertainty, all I found was disbelief and denial. He brushed off my concerns with a casual shrug, insisting that it was all in my head, that I was overreacting to a series of harmless coincidences. My husband swore this was all in my head: the tampons, the onesie, the bow, and all the rest. He was perfectly content to watch me agonize for weeks over a woman he insisted didn't exist. Shrugging off each progressively more unsettling discovery like it was news to him and telling me I was being irrational, he insinuated that I was experiencing postpartum depression 2 years after I'd given birth. For years later, I told him that one of my biggest fears for motherhood was to suffer from PPD, like my mother had with me, to not be fully present for our babies and be left with a world of guilt and regret as they grew older. But as the weeks stretched into months and the truth remained stubbornly elusive, my patience wore thin, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me whole. How could he dismiss my fears so callously to gaslight me into doubting my own sanity? How could he stand idly by as our family teetered on the brink of collapse? He told me I wasn't sleeping enough, that I missed the girls too much, that I needed to take a step back and reevaluate the state of my mental health. I gave him the benefit of the doubt because he was my husband, and because no other version of events made sense. Now, after a month of this mindfuck, I have nothing to show for my trust, for this pathetic situation, and a lot of anger. My husband failed to explain himself. When confronted, he stammered and stumbled over his words, offering half-hearted excuses that made no sense. He muttered something about trying to protect me from unnecessary stress about his sister, just wanting to make amends. But his words were disjointed and unconvincing. Each excuse was more implausible than the last. A desperate attempt to cover up the truth. His evasiveness only confirmed my worst fears. The man I had trusted and built a life with was now a stranger to me, hiding behind a facade of lies and deceit. I watched as he avoided eye contact. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The weight of his betrayal hung heavily in the air, a palpable presence that neither of us could ignore. There was no reasonable explanation for his actions or for the deceit. Annotated our marriage. Every time he opened his mouth, I could see the panic in his eyes. The realization that he had been caught and there was no way out. His silence on certain points spoke louder than any words ever could, revealing the depth of his dishonesty. I knew then that I couldn't stay with someone who had so blatantly betrayed my trust and jeopardized the safety of our children. The thought of my daughters being exposed to such toxic secrecy and manipulation was unbearable. I had to prioritize their well-being, and that meant making the hardest decision of my life with a heavy heart. I told him it was over. The look of shock and desperation on his face was almost pitiable, but it couldn't erase the damage that had been done. I walked away, determined to protect my children from any further harm. I decided to end the relationship and file for divorce. The decision was both heartbreaking and empowering. It was devastating to acknowledge that our 7-year journey together had come to such a bitter end. But it was also liberating to take control of my life and prioritize my well-being and that of my children. The divorce process was long and grueling. Each step felt like a new battle in an endless war. There were countless court sessions, each more draining than the last, where I had to relive the pain and betrayal over and over again. My husband fought me every step of the way, refusing to accept responsibility for his actions and attempting to paint himself as the victim. His determination to contest every detail made the process even more exhausting and emotionally taxing. In court, I detailed the discovery of the tampons, the hidden meetings with my sister-in-law, and the lies my husband had told to cover his tracks. I showed the Ring footage, which captured her entering our home with my children, and provided testimonies from my sister and brother-in-law to corroborate my claims. However, the court needed more than assumptions about my sister-in-law's character. They required concrete evidence of her past and present behavior, which was not easy to obtain. Despite these challenges, I remained focused on the bigger picture. I emphasized my husband's deceit and the breach of trust, which were undeniable. The court recognized the complexity of the situation and the emotional turmoil it had caused. After months of legal battles and countless court sessions, the court ruled in my favor. I was granted primary custody of our daughters, with my husband receiving supervised visitation rights. The judge acknowledged the need for a stable environment for the children, considering the deceit and the potential risks involved. Looking back, this ordeal taught me several valuable lessons that I hope others can learn from. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild. Always listen to your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. Communication is key. Address issues head-on rather than letting them fester. Most importantly, never settle for less than you deserve. My children and I deserve a life free from deception and betrayal, and I am committed to building that future for us. In your opinion, what do you think about this story? Please leave your comment below to let me know.
My girlfriend has princess syndrome. I fully support her, but I worry about drawing unwanted attention. Despite my concerns, she broke up with me. I have been with my girlfriend for about 5 months. We've been casual friends since college, but only began dating after she graduated. We get along really well. When I say princess syndrome, I don't mean that she is spoiled or entitled, because she isn't. Her clothes seem to take over her life. She dresses like a sort of fairytale princess on a near daily basis, excluding at work long frilly skirts, lace blouses, things like that. It works for her because she is very pretty and can pull it off. At first I found it to be very endearing, but then I became aware of how much time she spends on her outfits. She runs a blog that has a sizable amount of followers, and she is constantly posting outfit pictures, links to clothing items, and whatnot. She spends a few hours a day on her blog. At least, then she spends time sewing items for new outfits or for her Etsy store. When we go out, we get a lot of stares at what she's wearing. Her unique style draws eyes like moths to a flame. People can't seem to help themselves from taking a second look. Sometimes even a third. It's not just the occasional glance either. I've seen people stop in their tracks, nudging their friends and pointing her out as if she were a celebrity sighting. I've also caught people sneaking pictures of her on their cell phones, which is incredibly invasive. Once we were at a cafe and the guy at the next table was pretending to text, but was clearly angling his phone to snap a photo of her lacy blouse and long flowing skirt. Another time, a group of teenagers at the mall giggled and took selfies with her in the background. This attention makes me uncomfortable. It feels like we're always on display, unable to enjoy a private moment together. I tried to address this with her, asking her to tone it down a bit. She took my request to mean not wearing anything in her hair when we're out together. So she stopped putting on her usual flower crowns and headbands. While this was a small change, it didn't solve the core issue. She still wore her elaborate outfits, and the stares and sneaky photos continued. I didn't know how to explain that. It wasn't about the accessories, but about the overall impression her outfits left on people. I have told her several times that I love her just the way she is, but she seems to brush it off. Each time I try to emphasize how much I appreciate her unique style and creativity, and how much it drew me to her in the first place. I want her to know that my concerns come from a place of love and worry, not criticism. However, whenever I bring it up, she smiles, thanks me, and then moves on to another topic. It feels like she's not fully hearing what I'm trying to say, or perhaps she's choosing not to. I had hopes that when she started her new job in the career of her choice, she would become more serious, at least in her professional life. I thought the new environment might encourage her to dress more conventionally to match her colleagues in the office culture. Instead, her new boss and co-workers encouraged her to embrace her style. They love her whimsical outfits and even compliment her on them regularly. It's like she's become the quirky, fashionable mascot of the office, which only reinforces her choices. While I'm happy that she's found such a supportive workplace, I worry that people won't take her seriously or miss how kind and intelligent she is because they're too focused on her appearance. I fear that her clothes might overshadow her capabilities, making it harder for her to be recognized for her hard work and talent. I know how brilliant and compassionate she is, but I'm concerned others might not see past the frills and lace. How can I talk to her about dressing more appropriately without hurting her feelings? I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. I don't want to come across as controlling or unsupportive, but I also want to protect her from potential judgment. I need to find a way to express my concerns that balances my love for her uniqueness, with my hope for her to be seen for who she truly is. It's a delicate conversation, and I can think of ways to say one half of that, but it doesn't work with the other half. I get the point that it initially drew me to her because it did. That's fair. I guess I didn't think that it would be such a constant thing in her life, especially after she graduated. This is my problem. How do I ask her to dress more casually around me without her misinterpreting what I mean again, and also not hurting her feelings? I can think of ways to say one half of that, but it doesn't work with the other half. She doesn't need all the frilly stuff. She'd still look like a princess, even in simpler outfits. Her natural beauty and grace are what truly shine through, not just the elaborate clothes she wears. I've told her she has an effortless elegance that doesn't rely on layers of lace and ruffles. Yet, despite my reassurances, she continues to adorn herself with intricate details and fairy tale ensembles. And it's one thing for an artsy college student to dress alternatively, it's almost expected and embraced in that environment. Back in college, her style fit right in with the creative, free-spirited atmosphere. But she's a 23-year-old woman now, stepping into the professional world where first impressions and appearances can carry significant weight. I worry that her whimsical wardrobe might not be perceived as appropriate for her age and the stage of life she's in. I feel like her clothing masks how smart she is and makes her appear shallow. When people see her in these fantastical outfits, they might not take the time to look beyond the surface. They might assume she's all about fashion and overlook her sharp mind and compassionate heart. I know how intelligent and thoughtful she is, how she can have deep conversations about a myriad of topics and how much she cares about the people around her. But I fear that others might miss out on these qualities because they're too focused on her appearance. It's frustrating because I see her potential and the wonderful person she is, but I also see how society can be quick to judge based on looks. I want her to be recognized for her talents and kindness, not just her distinctive style. I wish she could find a balance that allows her true self to shine without the distraction of overly ornate clothing. I do think it's an attention thing, she says. She doesn't care about what people think about her, but she spent so much time on her blog replying to comments and such. I kind of doubt it. Her blog is a significant part of her life. She spends hours curating posts, taking photos and interacting with her followers. If she truly didn't care about others' opinions, would she invest so much effort into maintaining her online presence? It feels like she thrives on the validation and admiration she gets from her audience. She also has told me that she loves being approached by little girls while she's dressed up, which definitely makes me think it's about attention. She beams with joy when a child comes up to her eyes wide with our asking if she's a real princess. She often recounts these encounters with delight, describing how their faces light up and how she feels like she's spreading a bit of magic in their lives. It's heartwarming, but it also makes me wonder if part of her motivation for dressing this way is the attention and admiration she receives. Even if she won't admit it outright, she doesn't dress inappropriately. By those standards, she is well groomed and doesn't show much skin. Her outfits are always neat and she takes great care to ensure everything is perfectly coordinated. But is it appropriate to wear lace dresses and flower crowns to the supermarket? It's one thing to see such attire at a themed event or a festival, but it's quite another in everyday settings like grocery shopping. Again, it attracts unnecessary attention. People stare, some whisper and others even take photos. While she might enjoy the attention, it can be overwhelming for me. I want to be able to do mundane activities without feeling like we're putting on a show. I worry that this constant spotlight might also affect her in ways she doesn't realize. It's not just about the looks and comments. It's about being able to blend in when needed, to be taken seriously, and to avoid the judgments that inevitably come with standing out so much. Update 1. I didn't plan on updating, but things changed. I realized from my last post that I needed to be more supportive, but also communicate on how she could dress down on certain occasions so we could both be comfortable. Well, I never got a chance to talk to her about it. Last week she called and wanted to stop by my apartment after work. When she got there, I offered to make dinner, but she said she couldn't stay and we had to talk. I jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me and she looked really guilty. You can see where this is going. Last week she called and wanted to stop by my apartment after work. Her voice sounded a bit off, not as cheerful as usual, but I didn't think much of it at the time. When she got there, she looked beautiful as always, dressed in one of her signature outfits, a soft pink lace blouse and a flowing floral skirt. But there was something in her eyes, a seriousness that made my stomach churn with unease. I offered to make dinner, hoping to lighten the mood and maybe turn the evening around. She usually loved my cooking, and I thought a nice meal might help ease whatever was on her mind. But she said she couldn't stay and that we had to talk. The way she said it, with a quiet firmness, made my heart sink. Trying to break the tension, I jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me. I forced a laugh, expecting her to smile and reassure me that it was nothing serious. But instead she looked really guilty. Her eyes dropped to the floor and she bit her lip, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her skirt. At that moment, I knew where this was going, even if I didn't want to believe it. She took a deep breath and started to explain, her voice trembling slightly. She talked about how we were in different places in life and had different goals for the future. She said she had been thinking about this for a while and it wasn't an easy decision for her. Well, she talked and I mostly listened, too stunned to say much. But as she spoke, I found myself agreeing with her points despite the lump forming in my throat. It was a pretty amicable breakup, even though I felt blindsided by it. We both acknowledged that we cared deeply for each other, but had to be honest about our differences. We agreed to stay friends. Though at that moment the idea of friendship felt like a poor consolation prize for what we were losing. I've never been dumped before and it's fucking awful. The weight of the conversation hung in the air as she left, and I was left standing there in the silence of my apartment, feeling more alone than ever. I've never been dumped before, and it's fucking awful. I'm having trouble with the whole social media thing post-breakup. I want a way to keep in touch with her, but as soon as her relationship status changed, all these alternative-looking guys have been liking her posts and commenting on her pictures. I don't think she's seeing these guys, but it still hurts. My friend wants to set me up on a date, but I don't know if it's a good idea. I'm still reeling from the breakup and unsure if I'm ready to jump back into the dating pool. The thought of starting over with someone new feels overwhelming. On one hand, I appreciate my friend's effort to help me move on, but on the other, I'm still processing everything that happened. I understood some of her reasoning for the breakup. Mainly, I want to move out of the city once my lease is up, and I wanted her to move in with me. I had dreams of living somewhere quieter, maybe closer to nature, where life felt less hectic. I envisioned us building a life together, away from the noise and chaos of the city. I was worried about the long distance, knowing how tough it could be on a relationship. I thought if she moved in with me, we could avoid that strain and grow closer. But she didn't want to leave the city. She loves the vibrant energy, the endless activities, and the opportunities it offers for her career and her blog. The city is part of her identity and she couldn't see herself thriving anywhere else. She tried to explain how much the city meant to her, how it inspired her creativity, and connected her to a community that appreciated her unique style. I understood her point, but it still hurt to realize our visions for the future were so different. This fundamental difference in our goals was something we couldn't reconcile. It wasn't just about where we lived, but how we saw our lives unfolding. She saw herself staying in the bustling heart of the city while I longed for a slower pace in a more serene environment. It became clear that our paths were diverging and no amount of compromise could bridge that gap. She said something about me being controlling, too, but I don't think that's the case at all. It stung to hear her say that, because in my heart, I know that all I truly want is to protect her against all the potential harm that all the attention might attract. I've always been deeply concerned about how others might perceive her, and the potential judgments they might make based solely on her appearance. My intentions were never to control her or dictate how she should live her life. I fell in love with her precisely because of her unique style and vibrant personality. However, seeing how people reacted to her, the stares, the whispers and the sneaky photos made me worry about her well-being. I feared that this constant attention could bring unwanted consequences from simple misunderstandings to more severe risks. It wasn't about changing who she was, it was about ensuring she was safe and respected. I didn't want anyone to look down on her for any reason. Her clothes, while beautiful and distinctive, could sometimes overshadow her intelligence, kindness, and all the other qualities that made her so special. I was worried that people might not take her seriously in professional settings, or might underestimate her capabilities, because they were too focused on her outward appearance. All I wanted was for her to be seen and appreciated for who she truly was. Not just for how she dressed. I believed that if she toned down her outfits a bit, it would help others see past the frills and lace to the incredible person underneath. My suggestions were meant to protect her from potential prejudice and ensure she was given the respect she deserved. It hurts that she interpreted my concerns as controlling behavior. Update 2: I was going through an old email and found this account again. I was surprised I could still log in. And even more by the amount of people who had reached out to me. Whoa. While going through an old email, I stumbled upon this account again. It was a blast from the past that I didn't expect. I was surprised that after years, I could still log in, and even more by the amount of people who had reached out to me. Messages of support, advice and shared experiences filled my inbox. It was both touching and overwhelming to see how many people had connected with my story and taken the time to respond. It's a bit embarrassing to relive this breakup from almost 10 years ago. Reading through my old posts and the raw emotions I poured into them brought back memories I had long since buried. I could almost feel the sting of heartbreak and the confusion that followed. But now, with the distance of time, I can see things more clearly in retrospect. It wasn't meant to be, and I think I was reeling more from getting dumped than the actual loss of the relationship. At the time, the breakup felt like the end of the world. It was my first time being dumped and my ego took a significant hit. The shock and pain were intense and I struggled to make sense of it all. But looking back now, I realized that our paths were always meant to diverge. We had fundamental differences in our life, goals and values that would have eventually pulled us apart, even if we had stayed together longer. What I initially perceived as a deep loss was more about the bruising of my pride and the fear of the unknown future. The relationship itself, while meaningful, wasn't the perfect match. I had convinced myself it was. We cared for each other, but we were ultimately incompatible in ways that mattered. It's clear to me now that the breakup was a necessary step for both of us to find the right paths in our lives. Reflecting on it all, I can see how much I've grown since then. I am 33 now and married to a wonderful woman who's 31. We've been married for 4 years and I couldn't be happier with how our life together has unfolded. My wife is amazing. She's kind, thoughtful, and has a zest for life that is truly infectious. One of the biggest lessons I learned from my past relationship was the importance of supporting my significant other's hobbies and passions. It's something I've embraced wholeheartedly in my marriage. My wife loves running and baking. 2 hobbies that bring her immense joy and fulfillment. She's an avid runner, participating in local marathons and relishing the thrill of pushing her limits. Early morning runs have become a cherished part of her routine, and I admire her dedication and discipline. On weekends, our kitchen transforms into a baking haven where she experiments with new recipes, filling our home with the delightful aroma of freshly baked goods. Her passion for baking has become a source of happiness for our family, and our friends eagerly await her latest creations. We have a daughter who is turning 3 this year. She's the light of our lives, and watching her grow has been an incredible journey. As a father, I want her to be free to express herself however she likes, as long as it is safe. Of course, whether she wants to dress up as a princess, become an astronaut or anything in between. I want her to feel supported and loved in her choices. Encouraging her to explore her interests and express her individuality is something I am deeply committed to. I would do anything for them. My wife and daughter mean the world to me and their happiness is my top priority. I've learned to be more patient, understanding and supportive, qualities that have strengthened our bond as a family. The lessons from my past have shaped me into a better partner and parent, and I strive to create a loving environment where we all feel valued and respected. Supporting my wife's passions and nurturing our daughter's creativity has brought us closer together. It's a dynamic and joyful household filled with love, laughter, and the occasional flower fight during baking sessions. I'm grateful for the journey that led me here and for the beautiful family I am fortunate to call my own. I am still friends with my ex on social media. We don't talk, but we'll like each other's posts. She is married to another woman now who also dresses differently. It's not as frilly as she used to dress, but still unusual. Her pictures look like something out of Anne of Green Gables. She seems very happy on their farm together. My boyfriend of 4 months retaliated against me because I went out with my close friends until morning by calling me while he was having sex with his friends with benefits. Time has a tendency to curve around our feelings. Even though Brandon and I have only been dating for 4 months. The spectrum of emotions we have shared makes our time together feel both very short and shockingly lengthy. He studies architecture while I study graphic design at VL University. We are both sophomores due to our mutual passion for design. We initially met in a freshman seminar. From the beginning, our talks were smooth and conversational. Discussing our studies and aspirations for the future, we would frequently have coffee while surrounded by class models and sketches. In those early days, our relationship felt natural and easy. We spent many nights discussing our projects and ideas, which I always found enriching. Brandon's background was quite different from mine, particularly his strong Catholic faith and conservative views, which initially I found intriguing. He was upfront about his past and his values, including his limited experience with relationships and his decision to mostly save himself for marriage. However, as we moved past the honeymoon phase of our relationship, I began to feel the weight of our differences more acutely. His traditional views, which I once admired, started to feel restrictive, especially around topics of intimacy and personal freedom. He had been very open about his conservative approach to relationships, but this openness sometimes made me uncomfortable and skeptical about how it would affect our relationship. Our first major challenge came when I committed to a major group project with my friends from the graphic design program. The project, named 50 Specimen Shapes, was an ambitious plan to create 3D models for various abstract shapes, combining artistic flair with scientific precision. As the deadline approached, my team decided to pull an all-nighter to finish our work. I was excited about the project and shared my plans with Brandon, hoping he would understand the commitment it required instead. His response was cooler than expected. He seemed uneasy, not just about the late night, but also about me being deeply involved in something outside of our relationship. His discomfort seemed to stem from his religious beliefs, which made him wary of the unpredictable nature of creative projects. His reaction left a coldness between us as I prepared for the night. There was a noticeable tension in his goodbye that evening, and even his hug felt forced. It made me wonder if our relationship built on such different foundations could really last. Despite this, I headed into the project night full of anticipation but also concern, not realizing that the events of the evening would test our relationship even further. The day leading up to the planned all-nighter with my friends was a typical Thursday, marked by the usual rush of classes and the added buzz of creative energy that always seemed to spike as deadlines approached. I had spent most of the afternoon in the studio putting the finishing touches on my part of the project. My mind racing with adjustments and improvements. The vibrant atmosphere was contagious. Everyone throwing ideas back and forth. Our workspace a testament to weeks of hard work and chaotic creativity. I checked my phone intermittently, noting the absence of any messages from Brandon. It was unusual, given that we often exchanged quick updates or words of encouragement throughout the day. Deciding to break the silence, I sent him a text, hoping to lighten his mood and possibly share some of my excitement. "Hey, busy day here, but looking forward to tonight. Wish me luck." I typed, hoping the smiley face would bring a smile to his too. The reply came just as I was gathering my things to leave the studio for a quick dinner before the evening's marathon. "Good luck. We need to talk when you have a moment." The message read, void of any emojis that might hint at his mood. The brevity and tone of his text sent a small wave of anxiety through me. It was not what I had hoped to read, especially not today. Dinner was a rushed affair at a nearby cafe, where I sat alone with a sandwich and a cup of too strong coffee, mulling over Brandon's message. The cafe was cozy, a little nook that served as a frequent escape for me from the campus hustle. Today, however, the warmth of the cafe did little to ease the chill that had settled inside me. Returning to my apartment briefly, I found Brandon waiting for me. His figure slouched against the doorway of our small shared living room, an unmistakable tension in his posture as I stepped inside. The look on his face was serious, more somber than I had seen in days. "Hey, you're home early," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Brandon just nodded, his eyes following me as I dropped my bag and took off my coat. "We need to talk about this project." "Night of yours," he began, his voice steady but with an edge that immediately put me on guard. "I don't understand why you need to spend a whole night working on this with your friends. It doesn't seem like it's just about the project." His words stung, more so because they echoed a deeper distrust that seemed to have been growing between us. "It's just a project, Brandon. It's important for my course. And you know how these things go. We all push at the end to get everything perfect." I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Brandon crossed his arms, his brow furrowing slightly. "It's always about the project, isn't it? Or something else? I feel like you're slipping away doing all these things without me. And tonight it just feels like you don't want me around." I sighed, feeling the weight of his words and the widening gap they represented. "This isn't about not wanting you around, Brandon. This is about me needing to do this for my degree. For me. I thought you understood that." He looked away, the lines of his face hardening. "I do. It's just hard sometimes. I miss how it used to be with us." There was a sadness in his voice that pulled at me, a reminder of simpler times when our biggest concerns revolved around which movie to watch or what dessert to share. On a Saturday night. Now, standing in the dim light of our living room, those days felt like distant echoes, overshadowed by the growing complexities of our relationship. "I missed that too," I admitted softly, the distance between us feeling more profound in the silence that followed. Dinner ended with an uneasy truce. The issue temporarily set aside, but the tension lingering like a stubborn fog. As I grabbed my things to head out, Brandon's voice stopped me at the door. "Be safe. Okay?" he said. A trace of the old warmth in his voice that made my heart ache for what we were struggling to hold on to. "I will, I promise." I responded, offering him a small, hopeful smile before stepping out into the cool evening air. The night's possibilities stretched out before me, like the sprawling campus pathways. The excitement for the project was still there, but now it was tinged with a poignant mixture of concern and longing for the relationship I was still learning to navigate. The night of the project was set to be intense. A blend of creativity and chaos as we worked against the clock. My friends and I had booked a study room in the university's main library, a space often reserved for late-night cram sessions and collaborative projects. As I arrived around 8 p.m., the familiar sense of excitement and nervous energy filled the air, palpable among the scattered, laptop-strewn papers and 3D materials that covered the tables. The first few hours flew by as we dove into our tasks. Anna, a meticulous planner, coordinated our efforts, ensuring everyone stayed on track with their assigned elements. John, ever the perfectionist, was immersed in adjusting the lighting on our 3D models, creating the perfect shadows that made our shape seem almost lifelike. My role was to integrate the background graphics I had designed, ensuring they complemented rather than overwhelmed the models. At 10 p.m., I sent a quick message to Brandon in full swing here. Hope your evening is relaxing. The immediate response I hoped for didn't come, and I pushed the slight worry away, redirecting my focus to the vibrant discussion on color schemes and textures swirling around me. Midnight approached and we took a brief coffee break. The library's 24-hour cafe was buzzing with other students, similarly burning the midnight oil, and the air was thick with the aroma of espresso and the low hum of hushed conversations. I checked my phone again, noting the absence of any message from Brandon. A ripple of concern stirred within me, but I was quickly pulled back into the lively banter of my friends. Discussing the latest episode of a popular design reality show. By 2 a.m., the project was shaping up, but the fatigue was setting in. We powered through with energy drinks and the collective adrenaline that comes from nearing the finish line. I sent another message to Brandon, a bit more detailed this time. Still working hard. Miss you. The read receipt popped up almost immediately, but there was no reply. The silence nodded me, making the coffee seem a bit more bitter as 4 a.m. rolled around. We were in the final stretch, adding the last touches to our project. The room was quieter now, the earlier excitement giving way to focused concentration and the occasional yawn. I sent one last update to Brandon, half hoping he'd respond with words of encouragement or at least acknowledge my efforts. Almost done here. Can't wait for you to see the final product. Love you. The lack of response this time felt heavier, more loaded. I stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary, the glow highlighting the worry lines that had formed between my brows. Finally, around 5:30 a.m., we wrapped up our project. A visually stunning presentation of geometric and organic shapes stood as a testament to our hard work and collaborative spirit. There was a collective sigh of relief mixed with pride as we packed up our things. Despite the successful conclusion, my heart wasn't fully in the celebration. The unanswered messages from Brandon cast a shadow over my mood. I arrived home just as the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The apartment was silent. Brandon's side of the bed untouched, indicating he hadn't slept. On the kitchen counter, I found a note from him. Went out to clear my head. We'll talk when I get back. The terse note was unlike his usual thoughtful messages, and did little to ease the knot of anxiety that had tightened in my stomach over the course of the night. The words, so stark and devoid of his usual warmth, felt like a cold draft through the room. It was not like him to leave such a terse message sitting at the edge of our bed. I felt the weight of the night's efforts on my shoulders, and the heavier burden of an unresolved conflict. Waiting in the wings. The joy of our project's completion was tinged with a sadness that felt all too familiar lately. A reminder of how distant Brandon and I had become in such a short span of time. As I awaited his return, the excitement of the night faded into the background, overshadowed by the uncertainty of the conversation that awaited us. Brandon returned home late in the noon. The sound of the front door closing, a signal that a confrontation was imminent. I could hear the muffled sounds of his movements as he hung up his coat and placed his keys in the ditch by the entrance. Each noise echoing slightly in the tense silence of our apartment. The atmosphere was charged heavy with the anticipation of the difficult conversation that lay ahead. He found me in the living room where I had been staring out the window at the cityscape, lost in thought and dreading his return. As he entered, his expression was unreadable, a mask that hid whatever emotions he had stewed during his hours away. He paused at the doorway, his posture rigid, and then slowly approached where I sat. "So you were out all night for a project?" His tone was skeptical, laced with a bitterness that made me wince. The question felt like an accusation, a prelude to an argument I wasn't ready to have but knew was unavoidable. "Yes, Brandon. It was for my final project. You know how important this is for my grade." I responded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fatigue and emotional strain. I didn't want to be out so late either, but we had to get everything finished. "It's not something I can just put off," but Brandon scoffed, shaking his head as he paced a few steps before turning to face me again. "All night, though, seems like a bit much for just a project. You could have done some of it at home, couldn't you? Why did it have to be an all-nighter?" His doubt stung and I could feel the defensive walls building up inside me. It wasn't just me. The whole group was there. We needed to work together to get it all done. It's not something I can control. Everyone was counting on each other. He continued to look unconvinced. His arms folded across his chest as he leaned back slightly against the wall. "It just doesn't sit right with me. You being out like that and not even a call to check in. How am I supposed to trust that?" The room seemed smaller with each word. The air between us, thick with unsaid things and pent-up frustrations. I was so tired from this, so exhausted from the project and the sleepless night. "I'm telling you the truth, Brandon. I'm too busy to call, but I've texted a lot. But you haven't replied." Brandon's gaze hardened, and he let out alongside a sound of frustration and disbelief mixed together. "I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. Something about this doesn't add up." The conversation spiraled from there, with each of us rehashing old grievances and misunderstandings, our voices rising and falling in a familiar dance of conflict. Despite my attempts to explain the necessity of the night out, Brandon remained skeptical. His trust seemingly eroded by the incident. As the discussion wore on, I felt a profound exhaustion wash over me, not just from the lack of sleep, but from the constant battle to justify my actions and intentions. It was draining, this feeling of having to defend my commitment to both my education and our relationship. And as the afternoon light began to fade, so too did my resolve to keep arguing. Finally, I stood up, a gesture that paused our heated exchange. "I need some rest, Brandon," I said quietly. The fight gone from my voice. "I'm sorry you feel this way, but I've told you the truth. I hope you can believe me." Without waiting for his response, I turned and headed towards our bedroom, leaving Brandon in the living room surrounded by the silence that quickly filled the space I had vacated. The unresolved tensions remained a silent specter in our home as I closed the bedroom door behind me, seeking a refuge from the turmoil and a few hours of much-needed sleep. As the gentle colors of the morning light pierced the darkness, I looked forward to a peaceful morning to relax after the strenuous project session. However, the sudden ringing of my phone shattered the quiet of our apartment, catching me off guard. It was Brandon, considering the time and the tense messages we had exchanged earlier. I prepared myself for a challenging conversation, but I was still utterly unprepared for the events that were about to unfold. As the soft hues of dawn broke through the night, I anticipated a quiet morning to unwind after the intense project session. However, my phone's sharp ring cut through the stillness of our apartment, startling me. It was Brandon. Given the hour and the strange messages from earlier, I braced myself for a difficult conversation, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. "Hello." My voice was groggy, tinged with sleep and anxiety. The sounds that met my ears were not words, but moans. Distinct, unmistakable sounds of intimacy. My mind raced as I tried to process the audio assault. Confusion gave way to a horrifying realization as Brandon's voice came through the line, breathy and cruel. "I wanted you to hear what you've been missing," he said, a hard edge to his whispered words. The background noise didn't subside. It was clear he was not alone. The shock hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My hand trembled as I held the phone. My heart pounding with a mixture of anger, hurt and disbelief. How could the man I loved subjecting me to such a deliberate act of humiliation and spite? There was a pause, a soft shuffle. Then Brandon's voice again. Colder this time. "Because maybe now you'll understand how it feels to be unwanted," he said before the line went dead. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. I stood frozen, the echo of his words reverberating in my mind, each syllable a shard of glass in my heart. The pain was sharp and deep, a betrayal that cut to the core of my being. Tears spilled over, hot and unchecked as I sank to the floor. The room spun around me, a whirl of dark thoughts and unanswered questions. Who was the woman he was with? But more than anything, why would he choose such a devastating way to express his pain? In my shock, I called Anna immediately. She came to my apartment and rushed into the room. She was by my side, her hands gently lifting my chin to meet her worried gaze. "What happened? Oh my God. Are you okay?" Her voice was laced with concern, her eyes searching mine for an explanation. I shook my head, the words catching in my throat through sobs. I recounted the phone call, each word punctuated by a fresh wave of tears. Anna listened in silence, her arm wrapping around my shoulders in a comforting embrace. "This isn't just about tonight, is it?" she murmured after I had finished. Her voice soft but steady. "There's more going on here. More pain than just this moment." She was right. The incident wasn't an isolated one, but a climax of ongoing tensions and unspoken grievances that had been building between Brandon and me. It was the breaking point of something that had been fracturing slowly, painfully over time. Anna stayed with me as dawn turned to day, offering silent support as I processed the initial shock and began to consider the implications of what had happened. The reality of the situation was harsh. Not only had Brandon violated our trust in the most intimate way, but he had also used his actions as a weapon, a way to hurt me as deeply as he felt hurt. "We need to talk about this. Not just you and me, but you and him," Anna finally said, her tone firm. "This can't be brushed under the rug. It's too big, too painful." She was right. As much as I dreaded the confrontation, I knew it was necessary. The foundation of our relationship had been shaken. Perhaps irrevocably. And it was clear that things could not continue as they had been with Anna's encouragement. I found the strength to call Brandon later that day. My voice was steadier than I felt, bolstered by the conviction that I deserved better than the cruelty he had shown. "Brandon, we need to talk." I started my words clear, despite the tremor of emotion that underlay them. "What you did this morning was beyond hurtful. It was destructive." There was a heavy silence on the other end before Brandon responded. His voice was subdued, lacking the harshness of earlier. "I know," he admitted. And for a moment I thought I heard a hint of regret from him. I was angry, hurt. I had no idea how else to show, so I did that. Brandon hurting me like that. Making me listen while you were with someone else. That's not a way to solve anything. It's just causing more pain. I continued, my voice firm but shaking with the weight of my emotions. "I know," he repeated, his voice low. "I wasn't thinking. I just felt so disconnected from you. And I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry." Truly, his apology was a start, but the road to healing seemed long and fraught with potential setbacks. The trust between us had been deeply damaged, and I was unsure if it could ever fully be restored. After the phone call with Brandon, I retreated to the safety of our bedroom. The four walls felt like a sanctuary from the chaos and emotional turmoil that had erupted in our living room. Lying on our bed, I couldn't shake off the deep-seated sadness that clung to me, nor the images of Brandon's face twisted with accusation and mistrust. My mind spun in circles, reflecting on the spiraling decline of our relationship. It was a cycle, tension and misunderstanding that seemed to repeat itself with increasing intensity. I thought back to the early days with Brandon, when each moment together was filled with laughter and spontaneity. Those memories now seemed like echoes of a distant past. A stark contrast to our current reality, where smiles were rare and silences were loaded with unsaid grievances. It wasn't just the lack of trust or the painful confrontation that morning. It was the realization that I no longer recognized the man I had fallen in love with. He had become a stranger, one who could willingly inflict pain with such calculated indifference. As I lay there, a mix of exhaustion and despair washing over me, my phone buzzed with incoming messages. Reluctantly, I reached over to check it. Finding texts from Anna and a missed call from my sister, Leah. I dialed Leah back, needing the familiar comfort of her voice. "Hey, Leah." I began, my voice cracking slightly. "Hey. What's wrong?" "I could sense something was off from your text," she responded. Her tone immediately shifting to one of concern. I recounted the morning's events. The call from Brandon and the painful words exchanged. Leah listened silently, only interjecting to ask clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a heavy pause. "That's just cruel, you know. It's not like you to tolerate this kind of behavior. Not from anyone." Leah finally said, her words, firm and straightforward, mirrored my own thoughts. It was a reflection of how far I had strayed from the person I used to be. Someone who valued self-respect and mutual understanding, above all, in a relationship. "Yeah, I know. I don't even know who he was anymore," I admitted, feeling the weight of my own words. "I can't keep going like this. It's draining me, Leah. It's not healthy." "You deserve so much better," Leah replied, her voice soft yet insistent. "You need to think about what you really want. Moving forward, not just for the sake of the relationship, but for yourself." Her words sparked something within me, a flicker of determination amidst the confusion. It was a call to reclaim the parts of myself that I had neglected in my attempts to salvage our faltering relationship. I needed to reflect on what I truly wanted, not just drift along in the current of Brandon's moods and accusations. Later that day, I met with Hannah for coffee. As always, she was a grounding presence, someone who could always cut through the noise and help me see things more clearly. As I sipped my coffee, Hannah laid it out plainly. "Everyone sees it. You know you're not yourself anymore. You're always tense, always worrying about how to navigate around Brandon's feelings. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? Something that made you happy?" Her question hung in the air, stark and challenging. I didn't have an answer, and that in itself was telling. "He's changed, Hannah. Or maybe I'm just seeing the side of him he's hidden all this time," I said, the realization bitter, maybe. Anna agreed. Her brow furrowed in thought. "But more importantly, what are you going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? The thought of continuing in a relationship where I felt so undervalued, so misunderstood, was unbearable. Yet the thought of ending things, of stepping into the unknown, after all we had shared, was daunting. Over the next few days, I took time to myself reflecting on my values, my needs, and my future. I thought about the kind of love I wanted, the kind that was nurturing, respectful, and joyful. It was clear that what Brandon and I had now was far from those ideals. The love had been overshadowed by resentment and pain. A far cry from the partnership I envisioned. I realized that moving forward alone was a better path than staying in a relationship that had lost its way. It wasn't just about finding happiness, but about preserving my self-respect and rediscovering the strength I had before the relationship consumed me. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, I decided it was time to end the relationship with Brandon. I needed to express my decision. Not out of spite or anger, but from a place of honesty and self-respect. I hoped that he would release me, that he could see the necessity of the choice I was making. The decision to end our relationship was not easy, but it was necessary. It was a step towards healing, towards reclaiming the joy and peace that had once defined my life. As I prepared to have that final conversation with Brandon, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for all that we had lost, and relief that I was finally taking a step towards a future where I could be myself again, free from the shadows that our love had become with Brandon. The conclusion was just as challenging as I had expected. But beneath all the pain, there was a resolve that persisted. I was clear in expressing my demands and the sadness of a relationship that had deviated too much from happiness and respect for one another. As he listened, Brandon's expressions were a mixture of resignation and quiet recognition. Ultimately, he comprehended and acknowledged my choice, even though it was evident he was upset and regretful. In the weeks that followed, the immediate sense of relief I felt was tinged with moments of profound loneliness. Our shared apartment, once alive with shared dreams, now echoed with the quietness of solitude. I spent long evenings reflecting on what had gone wrong, turning over the memories both sweet and bitter. This introspection, though painful, was a necessary part of my healing process. Gradually, the sharpness of recent wounds gave way to a more profound understanding of myself and my boundaries. I began to reconnect with old friends, and my family relationships that had been somewhat neglected became sources of comfort and joy. Their support was instrumental in rebuilding the sense of self that had been eroded in my efforts to save a failing relationship. The knowledge I gained from this period of my life was priceless, but difficult to get. I came to understand the value of being honest and open with myself as well as with a partner. I realized the danger of compromising too much and losing oneself in the attempt to keep others happy. I made a self-promise to put emotional fulfillment and respect for the other person before my dread of being alone in a relationship. As I move forward, the scars from this experience remain. But they are a testament to my resilience. They remind me that I have the strength to face difficult truths and make tough decisions. That I deserve to be loved fully and without reservation. The journey of reclaiming the joy and peace I once knew is ongoing, but now I walk it with a clearer vision of who I am and what I truly value in life and love. I appreciate everyone listening to and reading my story. I have removed it from the platforms where I published it, since I believe the details of what he did with me should not reflect poorly on my accounts. The only page I want to share a tale on is this one. Please leave a comment after hearing the story so I know what everyone thinks. I'll probably read it several times over. I want to thank you again for bearing with me as I confessed.
My mom abandoned me when I was a kid, and now she disrespects my wife for not understanding her struggles. Me, 38, male. When I was 10, losing dad felt like the universe had suddenly tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a quiet, peaceful kind of passing, it was abrupt, shocking, the kind you replay in your mind over and over, trying to make sense of it. He was there one day, his laughter filling up our small living room, and then he wasn't. The details around his death were messy and painful. Too much for a kid to really grasp, but enough that the memories just sort of stick with you. Mom took it hard. Really hard. She tried to hold it together, but you could see the strain in her eyes, the way her hands shook a little more each day. She wasn't the same after that. None of us were. Our home felt like a completely different world. One where the colors had faded and the sounds were muffled. Mom, who used to be the heart of our house, filling it with warmth and laughter, suddenly seemed like a shadow of herself. She'd sit at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coffee she'd poured but never drank, lost in thoughts that clearly pained her. I remember the morning she told us about her decision to move back to her home country. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying the storm inside her. Our house, once vibrant with our family's daily routines, felt increasingly empty and silent. The walls echoed with the ghost of our past conversations, and each room held a memory of Dad's laughter, or his comforting presence. Being there, Mom said, was too much of a reminder of what we'd lost. She needed space to grieve away from the environment that echoed his absence. "It's just for a little while," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need some time to heal, to find some peace." The word temporary hung in the air, but as a kid, I didn't grasp the full weight of what was happening. I just nodded, thinking she'd be back soon, that this was just a short break and everything would go back to normal. Mom's move, intended to be a brief escape from her grief, became a permanent arrangement. Her brief visits were filled with awkwardness and a palpable tension, as if she was a guest rather than the mother who had raised us. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the struggle to reconnect with the children who felt more like strangers now. As weeks turned into months and then years, the reality of her prolonged absence settled in. Birthdays and holidays came and went without her. Phone calls were our only bridge, her voice becoming less familiar over time, strained with a sadness that didn't seem to fade. Each call was a reminder of the widening gap between our old life with Dad and our new reality. After Mom left, it was the Nelsons who took us in. They were old family friends, the kind who had known us since we were in diapers. Mr. Nelson was Dad's college buddy, and Mrs. Nelson had been Mom's maid of honor. They tried to fill the void as best they could, turning their guest room into our new bedroom, stocking the fridge with our favorite snacks, and even trying to keep up the same holiday traditions we used to celebrate as a family. Despite their kindness, the house never quite felt like home. It was always a bit too clean, a bit too quiet, lacking the chaotic warmth that had filled our own home. At night, the walls seemed to echo with the silence, a stark reminder that this wasn't just a sleepover, that our mom wasn't going to be back at the end of the weekend. I remember lying in that guest bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to my sister breathe softly in the bed next to mine. She seemed to adapt better, or maybe she just hid her feelings more. Nights were the hardest for me. That's when the what-ifs would haunt me. What if I had been less of a hassle, quieter, easier to handle? Would Mom have stayed if I hadn't been so much like Dad, as she often said I was? These thoughts would spiral, and I'd find myself gasping for air, feeling that old familiar pang of abandonment. Mrs. Nelson would hear me sometimes, her soft knock on the door a prelude to her sitting by my bed, whispering reassurances, trying to soothe the fears and doubts that gnawed at me. But no matter how gentle her touch or kind her words, they couldn't replace the comfort that would have come from my own mom's embrace. This experience shaped how I parent my own kids. I've always made it a point to be there for them, to be a constant presence in their lives. I've gone overboard at times, maybe, being too protective, too present. I want them to feel secure, to know I'm always there, no matter what. Because the absence of my mom, her choice to distance herself when we needed her most, left a void in my life that I've sworn never to replicate in theirs. It's tough sometimes, knowing that Mom was just grappling with her own grief while trying to find a way to cope. I understand it on a rational level, but emotionally, it still stings. Accepting her decision has been one of the hardest parts of growing up, and even now, it's a struggle not to let that old resentment color the love I still have for her. My wife, a wonderful woman, we married and have 2 wonderful childs together. I met my wife in college, a stroke of luck that I still thank my stars for. We had both chosen the same dreary morning lecture, Economics 101, and it turned out the only thing more potent than our mutual disdain for the subject was our instant connection. She sat next to me on the first day, her presence a stark contrast to the monotonous tone of the professor. She had this way of scribbling notes that was almost artistic, her expressions flickering between amusement and exasperation. We started sharing notes, then coffee, and eventually, our dreams and fears. Telling her about my family came later, when our casual coffees had turned into long dinners and we started thinking about a future together. It was a summer evening, one of those perfect ones where the air is just cool enough to be comfortable. We were at a little park near campus, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and gold. I felt the weight of my past nudging at me, urging me to open up about everything. I started with the good memories, my dad's roaring laughter, the way he used to scoop me up into the air, my mom's holiday cookies, and the noise of a house that felt full. But then I shifted to the harder truths. I explained how things changed after Dad passed away, how the brightness dimmed and how Mom eventually moved away. I told her about the years of feeling adrift, being raised by family friends who were kind but couldn't fill the void my mom left. My wife listened quietly, her hand finding mine as I talked. Her eyes never left my face, and in them, I saw a well of empathy and understanding. When I finished, there was a soft sigh, a slight squeeze of her hand around mine, signaling her support. She didn't bombard me with questions or pity. Instead, she shared her own story of loss, how she grew up without grandparents and much of her extended family, which made her feel isolated in a different way. That night, I realized how much I needed someone who didn't just know my joy but also understood my pain. It felt like a burden had lifted, sharing my past with her, and her acceptance and understanding of my family's complicated dynamics only deepened my feelings for her. It was then I knew she was more than just a partner. She was my ally. someone who would stand by me through the complexities of life. Ever since I shared my family history with my wife, there's been this unspoken tension hovering around the subject of my mom. My wife, being the incredibly supportive partner she is, has always been understanding about my feelings but has harbored a certain reluctance towards my mom herself. It's not out of malice or disrespect, it's more about her struggle to reconcile the abandonment I felt as a child. With the woman she's met a few times since we got married, I've tried to explain to her that my mom was just trying to cope in her own way after my dad's death. She was grieving, lost without him, I'd say, hoping to bridge the emotional gap that my mom's departure had created not just in my life but now in our marriage too. It wasn't that she didn't love us, she just needed time. But to my wife, who sees the world through lenses tinted with fierce loyalty to family, the idea that a mother could leave her children in the care of others, regardless of the circumstances, is a pill too bitter to swallow. She's never rude about it, never dismissive of my ongoing relationship with my mom. She encourages me to call her, supports my trips back home to see her, and she's always the first to suggest we send gifts on Mother's Day. But she remains distant, a polite coldness setting the boundaries of their interaction. During family gatherings or holiday dinners when my mom is around, my wife is cordial, but distant. She'll smile, engage in small talk, but there's a guardedness in her eyes, a firm line drawn that everyone seems to understand. "I'm here for you," she whispers to me, squeezing my hand under the table, a silent reassurance that her stance isn't meant to hurt me, but a boundary she sets for herself. It's a delicate balance, navigating this quiet standoff between them. I often find myself in the middle, an interpreter translating not just words but emotions and unspoken thoughts. I tell my mom, she's just fiercely protective of those she loves, hoping to soften her hurt at my wife's standoffish demeanor. To my wife, I gently remind, Mom has her flaws, but she regrets those years away, trying to kindle empathy in the ashes of past grievances. This dynamic, though far from ideal, has become a part of our life's rhythm. My wife's steadfast support of my relationship with my mom, without choosing to engage more deeply herself, speaks volumes of her respect for me, even if it's a compromise she silently bears. It's a silent testament to her strength and her deep understanding of my need to maintain that fragile thread with my past. Recently, I decided it was time for another trip back to my home country, to let the kids spend some time with their grandmother. My wife couldn't make it due to her demanding job, and while she encouraged us to go, I could tell she was relieved not to face the tension that usually accompanied these visits. I explained the situation to my mom when we landed, and she nodded, saying she understood, but her disappointment was palpable. The first few days were a blur of activities. My mom went all out, taking the kids to local parks and museums, filling our days with laughter and stories, almost as if making up for all the missed time. In those moments, watching her with the kids, it was easy to forget the complex layers of emotions that usually clouded her visits back home. The evening had started off well enough. We were at my mom's house, my aunt's laughter echoing through the kitchen as she cooked, the smell of spices filling the air, a reminder of so many childhood meals. It felt good to be home, even if home now had the bittersweet edge of missing voices and past grievances. My mom and my aunt, they've always had this way of making even the simplest meal feel like a feast, and tonight was no exception. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, just family, sharing stories and catching up. The kids, exhausted by the day's adventures, fell asleep almost as soon as their heads hit the pillows. I kissed them goodnight and headed downstairs where my mom and aunt were in the kitchen, glasses of wine in hand, ostensibly relaxed. The murmur of their conversation greeted me as I approached, but it was my wife's name that caught my attention, halting my steps. "She thinks she's too good for us," my aunt's voice floated up, tinged with resentment. There was a clink of glass, probably my mom nodding in agreement as she added, "Yes, but don't bring it up around him. She's a snob, but it's not worth the argument." It stung, hearing that. There in the dim light of the stairwell, a knot tightened in my stomach. My wife has always been meticulous about how she interacts with my family, careful never to flaunt her background or make anyone feel less. She'd go out of her way to connect, to show interest in their lives, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone. Her reticence at times, I knew, was out of a fear of overstepping, not a feeling of superiority. Hearing my wife referred to in such terms, by my own family, sparked a heat in my chest that was hard to tamp down. I lingered on the stairs, unseen, the familiar ache of being caught between the people I loved surfacing once again. They continued, oblivious to my presence, airing grievances that were usually spoken in hushed tones behind closed doors. I wrestled with my emotions, debating whether to confront them or retreat. The decision was made for me when my mom glanced up and caught my eye, her expression shifting from surprise to something like guilt. The conversation snapped off, replaced by a tense silence that filled the room like smoke. "I heard what you said," I found myself speaking, my voice steadier than I felt. My aunt tried to brush it off, saying it was just a slip of the tongue, but the damage was done. The air was thick with unsaid things, with years of miscommunications and hurt feelings. I explained, maybe more sharply than I intended, that my wife had never acted superior, that she simply prioritized her career and our family's well-being over everything else. My wife grew up in a world quite different from mine. Born into a wealthy family, she was the only child, the sole focus of her parents' affection and hopes. Tragically, her parents passed away when she was still in her teens, an event that thrust her into premature adulthood. They left her everything: their sprawling estate, significant investments, and various other assets. Despite the wealth and responsibilities that fell on her shoulders at such a young age, she never let it define her. Instead, she channeled her energies into her studies and later, her career, proving to everyone that her achievements were born of her own intelligence and hard work, not just her inheritance. She enjoys the finer things in life, sure, the kind of luxury she grew up with. High-end fashion, gourmet foods, vacations in far-flung destinations. But she carries it all with a grace and an ease that's devoid of arrogance. She's unapologetic about her tastes, yes, but never ostentatious. In contrast, I come from a solidly middle-class background. My family's world was smaller, our means more modest. We valued hard work, simple pleasures, and close community ties. Our house, always filled with warmth and laughter, was humble but happy. This stark difference in our upbringings was never lost on me, and initially I worried about how my family would perceive her, or she them. Despite these differences, my wife has never behaved superiorly or looked down on my upbringing. She's been nothing but respectful towards my family, always engaging in conversations, offering to help with meals during visits, and bringing thoughtful gifts that showed her attention to what they might appreciate, not just expensive items for the sake of display. Yet the underlying class difference sometimes creates an unspoken tension, especially with my mother. Mom, with her down-to-earth values and no-nonsense approach to life, has sometimes struggled to connect with my wife's world. Though my wife has made every effort to bridge the gap, ensuring she doesn't flaunt her wealth or make my family feel uncomfortable, there's always been a subtle, perhaps imagined, barrier there. This difference in backgrounds is sometimes amplified by the innocuous comments at family gatherings, or the slightly too long glances at my wife's designer clothes and accessories. I know it comes more from a place of unfamiliarity and perhaps a bit of envy, rather than any real disapproval. My wife understands this too, and handles such situations with a kindness and a deftness that make me love her all the more. She tries to put my family at ease, often downplaying her lifestyle and focusing on the many things we all have in common. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, the frustration evident in my voice. It was clear they hadn't intended for me to hear their words, and my mom's face fell, an apology forming on her lips. My aunt, ever the more confrontational, didn't back down. "She doesn't mingle with us like she's one of us because she thinks she's better," she stated bluntly, her eyes challenging me to contradict her. That hurt. It hurt because it wasn't true. "That's not it," I replied, my voice firm. "She's trying her best. Just because she doesn't always know how to show it, doesn't mean she feels she's above us. You're misreading her caution as contempt." My mom, softer, more apologetic, tried to soothe the rising tension. "We're just not used to her ways, that's all. Maybe we misjudged her a bit," she conceded, her eyes avoiding mine. But the damage was done. The evening's warmth evaporated, replaced by a chill that no amount of familial bond could easily dispel. I sat down with them, trying to explain further, sharing how my wife had often expressed her worries about not fitting in, about being seen as an outsider. It was a long conversation, one filled with admissions and reluctant understanding. My aunt listened, her expression showing defiance. They clearly didn't expect me to hear any of it, and my aunt said that my wife's refusal to interact with them is because she thinks she's better than them. I explained that isn't the case, but my aunt kept pushing the issue. Eventually my mom said it was fine if my wife felt that way, but I shouldn't defend her classist behavior. At this point I snapped and said that my wife resents my mom because she wasn't around when I was a kid. My mom and aunt didn't say anything to that, and I went back upstairs. After the conversation with my mom and aunt, the house felt colder, quieter. I needed to clear my head, so I stepped out onto the back porch, the night air crisp against my skin. Pulling out my phone, I sent a quick text to my sister, hoping she could offer some perspective. She's always had a way of seeing the middle ground, even when emotions ran high. Her response came back almost immediately, a testament to how often she played mediator in our family. "Just apologize to mom and aunt, okay? It's not worth the fight." That was just like her, always advocating for peace, even if it meant swallowing your pride. I stared at the phone, her words glowing in the dim light. It wasn't that simple for me. I didn't hold a grudge against mom for the choices she made when we were kids. I understood they were made under the weight of immense grief. But hearing her and my aunt speak so dismissively about my wife, as if her efforts to fit in and respect their ways meant nothing, stirred a defensiveness in me I couldn't easily quash. It wasn't just the words themselves that had cut deep, it was the realization that these conversations had probably happened before, not just tonight. That my mom and aunt had likely shared these thoughts between themselves, painting my wife in a light that was so far from the truth. It felt like a betrayal, not just to my wife, but to the efforts we'd both made to bridge our very different worlds. Sitting there in the quiet of the night, I typed out a response to my sister. I get what you're saying, but it's not just about making peace. They don't see how hard she tries, or how their words might make her feel unwelcome. I didn't expect my sister to fully understand. Her approach was different, shaped by her own experiences and personality. I knew I would eventually need to address this with Mom and my aunt, to clear the air, or at least to make my stance clear. But I also knew an apology from me wouldn't fix the underlying issue, that my family still held on to preconceived notions about my wife, notions that weren't fair or accurate. The house was quiet, the only sounds the occasional distant bark of a neighborhood dog, and the soft hum of the refrigerator. The conversation with my mom and aunt had left a palpable tension hanging in the air, thick enough to choke on. Alone in the small guest room where we were staying, I replayed the evening's events over in my mind, each word and sharp glance looping endlessly. In hindsight, I could see where I might have approached things differently. Maybe I could have been calmer, more diplomatic, instead of letting my emotions get the best of me. But in that moment, hearing them talk about my wife like that, someone who had tried so hard to be part of this family, despite feeling like an outsider, it felt like an instinctive need to protect her had overridden everything else. My wife wasn't just my partner, she was the mother of my children, the person who stood by me unconditionally. Defending her wasn't just a reaction, it felt like a duty. I leaned back against the headboard, the mattress creaking slightly under my weight. The room was filled with old family photos and knickknacks, a stark reminder of the deep roots and history my family had in this place. It made my decision even more difficult knowing that leaving early would be like admitting defeat, like letting those petty comments drive us away. But staying felt untenable too, with every forced smile and careful conversation just adding layers to an already thick facade. The kids were asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the grown-up complexities clouding the air around them. I didn't want their memories of this trip to be marred by a sense of underlying conflict, or to feel the tension that I was so acutely aware of. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through it aimlessly for a few moments before I made the decision. I'd booked flights for us to go back home earlier than planned. It wasn't just about escaping an uncomfortable situation, it was about preserving the peace and mental well-being of my family. My wife, who hadn't even come on this trip, deserved to know that her feelings were validated, not just by words, but by actions. As I looked up flights, I realized this was more than just a logistical change, it was a statement. I wasn't just leaving early, I was making it clear that while family was important, the respect and well-being of my immediate family, my wife and kids, came first. She's not opposed to the idea of visiting my home country, and has done so in the past. Her job is just very demanding and she said she'd rather do a longer trip with the four of us. We have 2 kids, when she can arrange more time off and the trip isn't solely based on seeing my mom. My wife's relationship with my home country, and especially with my family, is complicated to say the least. She's not against the idea of visiting. In fact, she's joined me several times before. But her job in corporate law is demanding. Long hours, constant deadlines, high stakes. That kind of pressure doesn't pause for anything, not even family trips across the globe. She's practical about it. She told me once, over a late dinner while the kids were already in bed, that she would rather wait and take a longer trip together with the 4 of us. If we're going to travel that far, let's make it a real vacation, not just a quick visit, she had said. Her logic was sound. It wasn't just about the travel time but also about the opportunity to truly relax and enjoy each other's company, without the shadow of obligations or past tensions lurking in the background. The last part is crucial because the trips to see my mom have often been tense. It's nobody's fault, really. It's just that their worlds are so different, and my mom has this way of making her opinions known in a manner that's a bit too straightforward for my wife, who is accustomed to the more measured, polite exchanges of her professional world. So, this time around, when the opportunity came for me and the kids to visit my mom, my wife encouraged us to go while she stayed behind to manage a major case at work. She framed it as practicality, not preference. Go, have fun with your mom. The kids miss her, and it's important they spend time with her, she had said, kissing me goodbye as we headed for the airport. She's always been clear about boundaries. If my mom were to visit us, she would welcome her with open arms, offer her the guest room, cook her meals, and engage in pleasant conversation. There's no animosity, just a preference to avoid situations she knows will be uncomfortable. This isn't just about personal comfort, it's about maintaining peace, about ensuring that when we do spend time together, it's quality time, not just obligated time filled with awkwardness and forced conversations. My wife has always been very composed about her feelings towards my mom. She isn't the type to harp on things unnecessarily. Early on, back when our relationship was shifting from serious to truly committed around the time of our engagement, I asked her point blank about her hesitation towards my mom. It was a quiet evening, just the 2 of us cleaning up after a quiet dinner at home, when I broached the topic. Her response was straightforward, devoid of any malice. She explained that the unease stemmed from my mom's long absence in my childhood, which to her signaled potential complexities in family dynamics she'd rather not entangle herself with more than necessary. She wasn't judgmental about it, She just laid out her feelings with the kind of clarity and foresight she applies to most things in life. It's about ensuring we have less stress in our interactions, so we can enjoy our time together as a family when it happens, she had said, her tone even, but firm. That conversation set the tone for how things would be, and true to her word, she hasn't brought it up unless absolutely necessary. Over the years, becoming a parent myself has opened my eyes further to her perspective. The thought of not being there for my kids, of leaving them prematurely, is unbearable. I see now how my wife's understanding of family and commitment could be so deeply affected by my mom's choices. Having children has a way of amplifying the protective instincts, the desire for stability and presence. It's clarified for me why my wife places such a premium on these qualities, and it's helped me appreciate her stance, even if I don't always fully share her reservations. Update. It's been a few months since I made my post. After reading your comments, I realized it would be rash to leave without trying to sort things out, so I had a conversation with my mom the next morning when my aunt was out and my kids were still in bed. The morning after the tense conversation with my mom and aunt, I approached my mom for a private talk. The house was quiet, with soft light filtering through the curtains, casting a calm over the living room where we decided to sit down. I could tell she was apprehensive about the discussion, perhaps worried about more confrontations. I started by apologizing for my outburst the previous night. My tone was firm yet conciliatory. I wanted to clear the air but also to stand by my wife's perspective, which I felt was important to communicate clearly. I'm sorry for how I reacted, I began. But we need to talk about why you think it's okay to say those things about my wife. My mom nodded, her expression one of regret mixed with a hint of defensiveness. She listened as I reiterated that the comments I overheard were hurtful and simply not true. If there are issues, we should be able to discuss them openly, not just let them fester, I added, hoping to establish a more open line of communication. My mom sighed, a long weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the past decades. I understand, but you need to see where I'm coming from too, she responded. She then explained how isolating it was for her after my dad passed away, how she needed to be around her own family back home to grieve. It wasn't about escaping from you or your sister, she insisted. I listened, trying to bridge my understanding with her experience. I get that, Mom, and I don't think anyone faults you for needing support, I said. But my wife sees it differently. She can't understand leaving kids behind during such a critical time, regardless of the grief. My mom bristled slightly at this. It's unfair for her to judge my actions from back then. She wasn't there. She didn't see the pain I was in. Her voice broke a little, her eyes conveying the turmoil of those days. You and your sister don't hold it against me, do you? I shook my head, trying to reassure her while also explaining my wife's point of view. We don't resent you, Mom, because we love you and we know you did what you felt was necessary. But you have to understand that my wife views family responsibilities differently, especially now that we have our own kids. The conversation moved slowly, with pauses that were filled with unspoken thoughts and regrets. I stressed that my wife's feelings were valid, just as her actions had been to her at the time. It's not about right or wrong, I concluded. It's about understanding each other's perspectives and finding a way to respect them. I can't make my wife forgive you, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the frustration building inside me. And I need you to stop speaking poorly about her. It's important you tell Aunt Jane to do the same. Mom listened, her expression a mix of understanding and helplessness. I'll do what I can, you know I will, she replied. But then she added, but I can't control what your aunt says or does. She has her opinions. This response frustrated me further. But don't you see? It's not just about opinions. It's about respect. If there's talk like that going on, it creates an environment I don't want around our kids. They pick up on everything, Mom. The idea of my children overhearing such comments about their mother worried me deeply. I can't be comfortable in a place where my wife, their mom, is disrespected. It's not just about us adults, it's about what kind of example we set for them. Mom nodded slowly, seemingly understanding the gravity of my concerns, but she held firm on her stance about my aunt. I'll talk to her, I promise. I'll try to make her see. But you know how she is, stubborn. And I can't openly criticize her. She's helped me through a lot. The room fell silent for a moment as I processed her words. The sunlight streaming through the window cast long shadows across the floor, a stark reminder of the day moving forward while we seemed stuck in this impasse. I looked at my mom, seeing the years of strain etched into her face, realizing that her relationship with her sister was just as complex as any other family dynamic. I understand she's family, I finally said. And I get that you've supported each other through thick and thin. But this is important. It's about protecting my family's well-being. Mom sighed, a sound of resignation mixed with resolve. I'll do my best, she repeated, her tone more assured this time. No one should feel unwelcome in my home. Things weren't going anywhere, so I told my mom I was going to go home early. She got upset and defensive, and I realized she would also keep bad-mouthing my wife, just when I wasn't around. That was the final straw. I went back upstairs and got flights for the next day. I sent my wife a text saying we'd be home early and I'd explain when I got back, but everyone was alive and healthy. She said that she was looking forward to it and asked if I wanted to call, but I just wanted to do it all in person. The next 24 hours in my mom's house were like walking on a tightrope, each of us carefully navigating around the tension that had settled in the air after our talk. The house, usually filled with the comforting smells of home-cooked meals and the sounds of casual family chatter, now felt unnaturally quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break the silence. As we packed up our things, the kids obliviously chattered about the trip, unaware of the undercurrents swirling around them. They were excited about going home, talking non-stop about showing their mom the souvenirs they had picked out for her. I tried to match their enthusiasm, but my mind was preoccupied with the conversation I'd had with my mom and the unresolved issues it left hanging between us. Finally, with our bags packed and the car loaded, I went to say goodbye to my mom. She stood in the doorway, her posture tense. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "When will I see you and the kids again?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. I took a deep breath, knowing my answer would be difficult for her to hear. "Mom, I want you in our lives, you know that. But things need to change before we come back. My wife deserves to be treated with respect, and I can't justify bringing the kids into a situation where that might not happen." The words hung heavily between us. Mom looked down, nodding slowly. "I understand," she murmured. "I'll work on things with your aunt. I promise." Her voice was sincere, and I believed her intent, but the reality of the situation was more complex than just promises made in the moment. "I hope so, Mom, because we miss you. But I need to put my wife and kids first," I continued, trying to keep my tone gentle yet firm. It was essential for her to understand that while I cherished our family ties, I couldn't compromise on the values I wanted to teach my children, about respect and kindness. Mom reached out, pulling me into a hug, a bit of the old warmth returning momentarily. "Give them my love," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Tell them Grandma thinks about them every day." As I got into the car and drove away, the image of my mom standing in the doorway lingered in my rearview mirror. When I got home, the sense of relief was palpable. After the tension of the last few days, walking through the door to see my wife and the familiar surroundings of our own space was grounding. She greeted me with a hug that seemed to physically lift the weight off my shoulders. The kids were already asleep, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background. We settled down in the living room, her on the couch with a cup of tea, me in the armchair across from her. She waited patiently as I recounted everything that had happened, my conversation with my mom, the awkward silence that followed, and the strained goodbye. When I told her about what happened, about the comments my mom and aunt had made, she let out a small laugh, more out of resignation than amusement. "Well, I'm glad I only got upgraded to a snob," she said wryly. "It could have been much worse." Her attempt at lightening the mood was appreciated, but her eyes were serious, concerned about the impact of what had transpired. "I stood up for you," I said, wanting her to know that her dignity was something I defended unequivocally. I made it clear that we couldn't just brush those comments under the rug. She reached across to squeeze my hand, her smile warm. "Thank you. That means a lot to me. Not just that you stood up for me, but that you're thinking about what this means for us as a family." The conversation shifted then to what the future held for my relationship with my mom. I told her we need some space, I continued, that I still want her in our lives, but our immediate family has to come first. My wife nodded, understanding the difficulty of the decision. "I support whatever you need to do," she said. "Just know that whatever distance you need to put, I'm here for you. We're in this together." Her words were reassuring, reinforcing that the choices I was making were not just my own burden to bear but something we navigated together as partners. "I think it's the best thing for now," I concluded, feeling a bit more confident in our path forward. "It'll give everyone some time to reflect and hopefully heal a bit." She smiled, that same reassuring smile that had seen us through countless other challenges. "I'm proud of you," she added. "It's not easy standing up to family, but you're doing what's best for us. That's what matters." It's been several months since we returned from that charged visit to see my mom, and life at home has settled into a comfortable rhythm. The kids are thriving, oblivious to the adult complexities that sometimes shadow the edges of family life. My wife and I have found solace in the normalcy of our daily routines: work, school runs, weekend soccer games. Despite the undercurrents of that trip, our home life feels solid, anchored. I've made it a point to keep in touch with my mom, dialing her number every couple of weeks. But each call seems to resurrect a bit of the tension from our last visit. Her voice often carries a tightness that wasn't there before, and our conversations are punctuated by long pauses where words used to flow easily. It's clear she's still processing the boundaries I set, and perhaps feeling a bit isolated by them. My sister, who has always been the peacemaker in the family, tells me during our own calls that she's keeping up her regular chats with mom. She mentions that mom feels judged, not just by what happened during our last visit but by the enduring echo of her past decisions. "She's still hurting," my sister explained one evening, her voice laced with concern. She feels like everyone's holding her grief against her. I listen, and I try to understand. Grief is a strange, malleable thing that touches everyone differently. I hope with time, Mom will see that it's not about judgment but about understanding each other's boundaries and emotional spaces. As much as I want my kids to have a relationship with their grandmother, their only living grandparent, I'm acutely aware of the need to protect my wife's emotional well-being. She's been incredibly supportive and understanding, but I know the situation has been hard on her too. The balance is delicate, trying to navigate these waters without tipping anyone overboard. Since becoming a father, my perspective on family and relationships has shifted significantly. It's like my children have opened up new chambers in my heart and mind, chambers filled with deeper empathy and understanding, especially towards my wife. Watching her as a mother, seeing her dedication and the boundless love she pours into our children, I find myself constantly amazed and grateful for her presence in our lives. The thought of losing her, of my kids facing life without their mother, sends a cold shiver down my spine. It's something I can't even bear to think about for too long. This fear, this visceral reaction, it helps me understand why she's so sensitive about family matters and why she's been so adamant about setting boundaries with my mom. It's not just about past grievances or discomfort. It's about ensuring our family unit remains stable and supported, no matter what. Reflecting on this has also given me a fresh lens through which to view my own childhood. I forgive my mother for her choices during our most difficult times, decisions made while she was engulfed in her own sea of grief. I know that she did what she felt was necessary to survive emotionally, even though it meant being physically distant from me and my sister. Forgiveness, however, doesn't erase the understanding of the impact of those decisions. It doesn't wipe away the fact that those choices left marks, shaping how I view relationships and responsibilities. This empathy I hold for my wife, stemming from our shared parenting journey, makes me think about how I would feel if the roles were reversed, if it had been her parents who had left her in a similar situation. Honestly, I doubt I could easily forgive such an action. The mere idea stirs a protective instinct in me that is fierce and uncompromising. I would want to shield her from that kind of pain, just as I try to protect our children from any hurt or unnecessary hardship. This has led to many conversations between us, sometimes late into the night when the world is quiet and it's just the two of us, sharing our thoughts and fears. These discussions are sometimes tough, but they're always cathartic. They bring us closer, aligning our understanding and approach to how we manage our relationships with our extended family. Thanks for all your advice. For those of you who said I should get therapy, I am doing fine, but thanks for the concern.
My sister is severely autistic, and I hate her for turning my life into a living nightmare. I hate her. That should be wrong to say, but it doesn't feel like it. Ever since my sister was born, it's like I vanished from my parents' radar. I was 6, excited to be a big sister, but that excitement faded fast. The shift was gradual but undeniable. Suddenly, I was moving into the basement because she needed to be closer to Mom and Dad. That hurt. The basement was creepy and cold, and I missed the warmth of being near them. Nights down there were long and lonely. I'd hear the rest of the family upstairs and feel so cut off, like I was more of an afterthought than a daughter. Losing my toys to her was another blow. She didn't mean to break them, but it happened all the time. I remember trying to explain to my parents how it made me feel. Hoping for a bit of sympathy, maybe even justice. But all I got was she's younger. She doesn't understand. You're the big sister. You should be more understanding. It felt so unfair. Those toys were my escape. And seeing them broken without anyone caring enough to address it just piled on the feeling of being invisible. The MacBook incident was the last straw. School had given it to me because I'd been doing really well. And then one day it was just destroyed. My school was mad at me for being careless. And my parents. They just added to the blame. No one stopped to consider. It wasn't actually my fault. I was furious and hurt, but mostly I felt alone in dealing with the mess. It wasn't just about a laptop. It was about feeling like nobody had my back. Honestly, trying to balance being a sister and having a life is rough. I love my sister. Sure. But it's like my parents forget I'm still a kid, too. Every time she needs something, I have to drop everything. Doesn't matter if I'm studying, hanging out, or even trying to catch a break. It's like I'm on call 24/7 without even signing up for it. I couldn't remember the last time I hung out with friends without constantly checking my phone. Worried I'd miss a call from home needing me to rush back. My life felt like it was on a perpetual pause, always waiting for the next crisis or the next demand for help. The day I decided to go watch the new Spider-Man movie was a big deal for me. It had been ages since I'd made plans that felt purely for my own enjoyment. My friend Jake had been talking about it for weeks and his excitement was contagious. I needed that break, a couple of hours where I could just be a teenager, not a caretaker. So I made a decision. I figured just this once I turned my phone off to enjoy the movie, not worry about anything else. Just 2 hours. You know, walking out of the theater, turning my phone back on. I felt like I was hit by a truck. Missed calls and texts everywhere. I called home immediately. The joy from the movie evaporating with each ring when my mom picked up, her anger cut through me. "Where have you been? We needed you an hour ago." I could barely get a word in. I rushed home feeling guilty, but also kind of angry when I got there. It was like walking into a storm. My parents were furious. Their disappointment. A tangible force in the room. "We rely on you, and you just decide to disappear to watch a movie." My dad's voice was sharp, his words punctuated by my sister's background noises. Like going to a movie with some kind of crime. I tried explaining, I just wanted a break, that I just wanted a couple of horse to myself. But it fell on deaf ears. It didn't matter. "Your responsibilities here are more important than some movie." My mom added her words. Final. They grounded me. Said I was being irresponsible all over a movie. Sitting in my room afterward. It hit me. This wasn't about the movie. It was about feeling stuck. Yeah, I get it. My sister needs me. But sometimes I just want to do something normal without feeling guilty or getting into trouble for it. Being 18 and feeling like you're not allowed to have your own life is tough. It was about feeling trapped in a role I never chose, about longing for a piece of normalcy in a life that felt anything but normal. I loved my sister deeply, but in that moment, I couldn't help but feel robbed of the simple teenage experiences of friendships and carefree moments. Living in my house feels like I'm trapped in a loop where everything revolves around my sister and her needs. Don't get me wrong, I get it. She needs a lot of care and I want to be there for her. But sometimes it feels like I'm just another item on the family's to-do list. Help your sister make sure she's okay. Can't you see we're busy with her? It's exhausting feeling more like an extra hand. It's like I'm invisible. Unless they need something for her. This feeling of being a slave in my own home. It's suffocating. I carry this weight around. A burden that's made me question my own worth around the house than an actual member of the family. Then there was this one week that felt like it could be different. I had been chosen to give a speech at a school event. Something about that recognition. It lit a spark in me. I worked hard on that speech, pouring my thoughts and feelings into every word. When my parents said they'd be there to watch me for the first time in a long time, I felt valued. Finally, something about me. I worked on my speech every night, imagining looking into the crowd and seeing my parents. There, maybe even catching them smiling proudly. The excitement was like a beacon, a rare light in the usual dimness of my daily life. Like maybe this time things would be different. But they weren't. They missed it because of something with my sister. Once again, they blamed it on my sister standing there about to start my speech and not seeing them crushed me. I pushed through, voice shaky and hands trembling. I cried not just for the speech, but for all the times I felt sidelined. Yeah, I made it through and people clapped, but it felt empty. The whole walk home. I couldn't stop the tears. It's not like I wanted to make a big deal about them missing the speech, but it just hit hard. It felt like a reminder that no matter what happens with me, it'll always be secondary in walking home. All I could think was how this pattern seems like it's never going to end. Talking about colleges with my dad was something I'd been looking forward to. It started off pretty normal. I was actually excited. You know, for once, it felt like we were focusing on my future, on something that was about me. I was getting into the idea, thinking maybe college was my chance to get out and do my own thing, away from all the chaos at home. We were looking at some brochures, talking majors and campuses. It was the closest to dreaming I'd gotten in a long time. Then my dad made that joke. Something about picking a high-paying major. So I'd be set to take care of my sister when they're gone. He laughed, thinking it was just a light-hearted comment, I guess, but it hit me hard. All my bottled-up feelings just exploded. I lost it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started crying, then yelling, telling him how unfair it was that my entire life was expected to revolve around being my sister's caretaker. It was all coming out. Every bit of resentment, every moment of feeling overlooked and undervalued. A burden that's made me question my own worth around the house than an actual member of the family. Then there was this one week that felt like it could be different. I had been chosen to give a speech at a school event. Something about that recognition. It lit a spark in me. I worked hard on that speech, pouring my thoughts and feelings into every word. When my parents said they'd be there to watch me for the first time in a long time, I felt valued. Finally, something about me. I worked on my speech every night, imagining looking into the crowd and seeing my parents. There, maybe even catching them smiling proudly. The excitement was like a beacon, a rare light in the usual dimness of my daily life. Like maybe this time things would be different. But they weren't. They missed it because of something with my sister. Once again, they blamed it on my sister standing there about to start my speech and not seeing them crushed me. I pushed through, voice shaky and hands trembling. I cried not just for the speech, but for all the times I felt sidelined. Yeah, I made it through and people clapped, but it felt empty. The whole walk home. I couldn't stop the tears. It's not like I wanted to make a big deal about them missing the speech, but it just hit hard. It felt like a reminder that no matter what happens with me, it'll always be secondary in walking home. All I could think was how this pattern seems like it's never going to end. Talking about colleges with my dad was something I'd been looking forward to. It started off pretty normal. I was actually excited. You know, for once, it felt like we were focusing on my future, on something that was about me. I was getting into the idea, thinking maybe college was my chance to get out and do my own thing, away from all the chaos at home. We were looking at some brochures, talking majors and campuses. It was the closest to dreaming I'd gotten in a long time. Then my dad made that joke. Something about picking a high-paying major. So I'd be set to take care of my sister when they're gone. He laughed, thinking it was just a light-hearted comment, I guess, but it hit me hard. All my bottled-up feelings just exploded. I lost it. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I started crying, then yelling, telling him how unfair it was that my entire life was expected to revolve around being my sister's caretaker. It was all coming out. Every bit of resentment, every moment of feeling overlooked and undervalued. Trying to make him see how much I've had to give up. How everything always circles back to what my sister needs. But they didn't get it. My parents just stood there staring at me like I was speaking another language, watching me lose it. No comfort, no apologies. Nothing. Their faces were so cold, so detached. It was like they couldn't understand why I was so upset over a joke. That's when I realized they weren't going to hear me out. I ran to my room, slammed the door. And I've been here ever since. And here's the thing. I've been in there for hours, and they haven't even bothered to check on me. Not a knock. Not a word. Nothing. It's like my outburst didn't matter to them. It's so lonely sitting here knowing that even this me being this upset isn't enough to get them to see how much I'm hurting. It's like I'm trapped in this role they've set for me, and my feelings about it don't matter at all. Am I wrong for wanting more than this? For wanting to be seen as more than just a future caretaker for my sister? It just feels like no matter what I do, it's like my life doesn't matter. I am nothing to them. Nothing more than just an insurance for my sister. After they are gone. After hours turned into a day and then another with no word from my parents. Something in me clicked. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something had to change. It wasn't just about getting away for a bit. It was about needing some space to figure out my own stuff without always being pulled back into the same old situation. I thought of the one person who'd always seemed to get it, Grandpa, without making a big plan. I just packed some essentials into a backpack one night and left. I texted him I was coming over, half expecting him to talk me out of it or to call my parents, but he didn't. He just texted back. Doors open. Staying with Grandpa has been eye-opening. It's not like every moment has been some deep heart-to-heart, but it's just calm here. He lets me be. We've talked about college, about what I might want to do. And it's the first time in a while I've been able to think about my future without feeling guilty or stressed. He's been supportive, encouraging me to think about what I want, not what I feel obligated to do. It's weird, but in just a week here, I felt more like myself than I have in years. We've had meals together, watched some old movies, and he shared stories about when he was my age. It's been nice, simple and kind of freeing. I've even started researching colleges again, this time looking at programs I'm actually interested in, not just ones that might make enough money to take care of my sister in the future. Being with Grandpa has given me a glimpse of what that might look like, and it's something I want to hold on to. Wow. Thank you for all the support and love that you guys have given me. I never expected this post to reach the popularity it did. Thank you all. After thinking about it for these past few hours, you are right that I don't despise my sister. It's not her fault that she was born the way she is. My parents came to talk to me a while after my breakdown, but I was unable to bring myself to talk to them and only cried and asked them to leave. They have made arrangements with my grandfather for me to stay with him for the time being. My parents want to talk to me, but we have decided it's best I leave for now to have some space and time to collect myself. We will be sitting down and talking later this week about this issue. Thank you all again for the love and support through this. I started by telling my grandpa the story of why I broke down the way I did, and to be honest, when I finally spilled everything to Grandpa, his reaction was way more intense than I expected. I mean, I knew he'd be surprised, but he looked downright shocked. Horrified. I told him all about how things have been at home, how I've basically been my sister's full-time caregiver on top of everything else, and how it all came crashing down that day with my dad's joke about college and taking care of her forever. Grandpa was seriously upset, especially when he found out that my sister was supposed to have professional help that she wasn't getting. He said a lot of stuff. He told me some things that I don't feel comfortable repeating here, but in essence, my sister is supposed to be getting care from a professional and that my parents were ignoring that. But the gist was that it wasn't right or safe for me to be in that position, especially with how things were with my sister. He couldn't believe my parents were putting all this on me, and that they'd kept so much from the rest of the family. He was also really mad about the whole movie incident, saying it was the last straw that showed how unfairly I was being treated. Grandpa was pretty chill most of the time, so seeing him this mad was kind of a big deal. He told me straight up not to talk to my parents unless he was there, which was a relief, honestly. He said he talked to them first, sort everything out and be there with me for any conversations in the future. But it wasn't just Grandpa over the next few days. I heard from aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it, they were all checking in, making sure I was okay, and they were all just as shocked as Grandpa was. Turns out my parents had been telling everyone they had a professional caregiver for my sister and even taking money from the family to pay for it. Except that caregiver never existed. Everyone was pretty upset about being lied to, especially about something so serious this past week. Man, it's been a roller coaster. Tough, yeah, but also kind of eye-opening in a good way. The whole drama with my parents and finding out all that stuff I had no idea about was a lot to handle. But then there's been this unexpected silver lining. My extended family stepping up in ways I didn't even know I needed. Grandpa has been at the center of it all, trying to make up for what he keeps calling lost time. He's been really pushing me to just be a teenager again. It's weird, but nice getting nudged to hang out with my friends more or just chill and do whatever I feel like. Stuff I haven't really done in, well, forever. It's like he's on this mission to help me reclaim parts of my life I didn't even realize I was missing out on. And it's not just him. My aunts and uncles have been amazing too. They've been around a lot this week, checking in, bringing over food, just talking and actually listening. It's like they're making this massive effort to show they care, to make sure I don't feel alone in this whole mess. It's pretty overwhelming. But in the best way possible. For the first time in what feels like ages, I'm not just the sister or the caretaker. I'm just me. And that feels really good. The talk with my parents on Saturday night disaster doesn't even cover it. I went in hoping maybe, just maybe, we could start fixing things. Instead, it fell apart even more. They actually admitted to a bunch of stuff. Stuff so messed up. I can't even bring myself to type it out here. But the kicker, not a single sorry came out of their mouths. Instead, they doubled down, saying I was pretty much born to be my sister's caretaker. Yeah, my dad actually said that, like, my whole purpose was just about taking care of her. I couldn't keep it together. All the stuff I found out. All the support I've been getting from the rest of the family. It all just bubbled up. I called them out on everything. The lies about the caretaker, the money they were supposedly spending on it, but actually weren't all of it. But they just dodged and made excuses. By the end of the talk, things were even worse than before. It felt like hitting a brick wall, trying to get through to them. I'd gone into that conversation with a sliver of hope that we could mend things. But I walked out feeling like that chance was completely torched. So after that disaster talk with my parents, I made up my mind. I'm done. Had a long chat with Grandpa and my uncle last night, and we all agreed it's best if I don't go back. Today's the day I'm officially moving out to live with Grandpa. It feels weird, you know, making this huge change. But it also feels right. Like I finally have some control over my life again. I've also decided I'm leaving the state for college once I'm done with high school. Just the thought of starting fresh somewhere new is kind of thrilling. My aunt, she's been incredible through all this. She told me she's going to start sending the money directly to me. The money she used to give to my dad for my sister's care. Guess it's going to be my college fund now. My parents. They've called a couple of times since that night. But if you're thinking they called to say sorry or that they missed me. Nah, they just wanted to know when I was planning to come back home. It's like they're not even trying to understand why I had to leave. I know this is going to be a huge change, and honestly, I'm kind of scared. But at the same time, I feel this weight lifting off me. I'm finally making decisions for myself, and there's something really freeing about that. Today is just the start of something new. I guess deciding not to go back to my parents was tough. Not going to lie. There's this uneasy feeling sitting in my stomach, but deep down I think it'll fade with time. The support I've been getting from the rest of my family has been unreal. It's weird, even though I've made this big decision. Feeling all their love and support makes the whole situation a bit easier to handle. But yeah, the harsh truth. I've pretty much lost my parents through all this. That realization hits hard. It's a lot to process, and sometimes I catch myself wishing things could have been different. But through all the mess, I've come to see something really important. I don't hate my sister. That anger I thought I felt towards her was misplaced. She's not the one to blame for how our parents chose to handle things. I love her more than I can say. And hating her for something she had no control over was wrong on so many levels. I hope someday I can make that right. For now though, leaving is what I need to do for myself. It's about finding my own way, figuring out who I am outside of this whole situation. It's going to be a journey, but I'm ready for it. Edit. Thank you all so much. I wish I could respond to every single one of you, but my lunch only lasts so long. I'll update tonight how the move out went, but until then, thank you all. I want to say that your support has been amazing, and your kindness means more to me than anyone could ever imagine. Moving out was surreal. Grandpa and my uncle were with me every step of the way, helping me pack up my life into boxes and bags. Everything that meant something to me. We make sure to grab all the important stuff like my birth certificate and social security card. It felt weirdly official, like I was collecting pieces of my old life to start a new one. My parents, they were pretty much silent the whole time. Dad took off with my sister not long after I got there, leaving just my mom to watch us pack. She didn't say much. Just hovered in the background. It was awkward, tense even. But then, as we were about to leave, she finally broke down. She said she loved me, that she'd missed me. After days of silence, those words hit differently. I hugged her, said goodbye. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting in my new room at Grandpa's house, I keep replaying that moment. Did she mean what she said after everything? It's hard to know for sure. But I want to believe she did. Right now, all I can do is focus on what's ahead. Maybe with time, my parents and I can find a way back to each other. I'm